Hello, my friends, and welcome. As the night falls and the world around you slows down, let's journey back to a time long past, a place shrouded in legend, mystery, and the echoes of ancient philosophers. Imagine a land where marble temples stood tall against a brilliant azure sky, where minds like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle pondered the very nature of existence, and where the foundations of democracy were first laid down amidst the hustle and bustle of the agora. Picture the sun-drenched shores of the Mediterranean, where olive trees sway gently in the breeze, and the majestic mountains of Greece rise from the earth like silent guardians of history. This is the world of ancient Greece, a civilization that has given us so much philosophy, art, architecture, and a glimpse into a way of life that still resonates with us today. It's a place of grand ideas, remarkable achievements, and eternal stories. But beneath the golden glow of its legendary past, behind the stoic faces of marble statues and the echoes of powerful speeches in the assembly halls, there lies a much harsher reality, a truth that we may not be prepared to face. Because, while ancient Greece shaped the course of Western civilization, it also demanded sacrifices from its people, and for many, life was a relentless struggle for survival. The idyllic image we often conjure in our minds, the philosophers deep in thought, the warriors in their armor, the brilliant minds who created works still revered today, can only tell part of the story. The reality for the common person was far from the grandeur we associate with the legends of this ancient civilization. Imagine, if you will, waking up in a small, sun-baked home, the walls of your humble dwelling radiating heat from the early morning sun, already turning your space into a slow-cooking oven. There is no air conditioning to cool the thick stone walls, no soft sheets to wrap yourself in for warmth, and certainly no comforts of modern life that we often take for granted. Instead, you live in a world where the struggle for survival begins the moment your eyes open, and it only grows more demanding as the day unfolds. Your house is made from rough stone or sun-dried mud bricks, with only small, unshuttered windows to let in the light or the occasional breeze. There is no insulation to protect you from the harsh elements. In summer, the walls absorb the scorching heat, leaving you trapped in a furnace, while winter brings its own challenges, with the cold stone turning your home into an icy prison. You rise with the sun not out of habit, but because it's already too hot to stay lying down for even a moment longer. The earth beneath your feet is unyielding, the air dry and heavy. There is no luxury, no comfort to cushion you from the challenges ahead. As you step out into your modest world, you quickly realize that your home is not just a place for sleeping and eating, but a space shared with everything that defines your daily existence. In a small room, your entire family lives together, sleeping, eating, and even arguing over who tracked mud into the house. You can't escape the heat, the noise, or the relentless sense of togetherness. For in this world, privacy is a distant luxury, something reserved for the gods, not for people who are simply trying to make it through another day. This is the ancient Greek experience for most of its citizens. No grand feasts, no luxurious palaces, no time for contemplation as we imagine it. The streets, too, are a constant reminder of the rough and ready world in which they live. The public spaces serve as everything: a marketplace, a place for news, a place for waste, a place for life to unfold in its messy, unrefined reality. Your shoes are worn down from constant walking on unpaved roads, through bustling marketplaces, and over stones baked by the relentless Sunday, and yet, amidst all this discomfort, you must continue. For in ancient Greece, survival is not a given. It's a challenge, an everyday struggle that forces you to keep moving, keep working, and keep hoping for a better day. But what about those moments we so often romanticize? The moments where the philosophers stand tall, their voices echoing in the public square, debating lofty ideas about ethics, existence, and the nature of knowledge itself. Isn't that what we remember when we think of Greece? Isn't that the vision we hold in our minds of grand speeches, of the pursuit of wisdom, of democracy being born in the light of reason? Certainly, this was a part of Greek life, and its legacy still shapes our world. But even in those moments, life was far from easy. For the average person, a typical day could not be filled with such philosophical debates. No, the average citizen rose not to contemplate the mysteries of the universe, but to face the immediate challenges of their existence. They would head to the public fountain to fetch water, carrying heavy clay jars and hoping not to trip. There was no luxury of privacy when it came to cleanliness. Instead of a morning shower, you would rub oil on your skin to gather dirt and sweat, then scrape it off with a curved metal blade, your spa treatment, if you will, but far from the relaxing indulgence we know today. There were no soft towels, no fragrant soaps, no modern comforts of any kind. It was a world where hygiene wasn't about cleanliness so much as it was about ritual. And when you finally break your fast, it's with barley bread dense, dry, and as unappetizing as you can imagine. If you were lucky, maybe you would dip it in some watered-down wine, but that's about as luxurious as it gets. The breakfast of an ancient Greek was far from the spread we indulge in today. No eggs, no fresh fruit, no coffee to lift your spirits and get you moving for the day. This was a meal of necessity, not enjoyment, meant only to fuel you for the long hours of work ahead. This brings us to the larger reality. The majority of ancient Greek citizens lived in a world that was unrelentingly difficult. The struggles of daily life were compounded by the ever-present threat of war, the lack of reliable healthcare, and the deep social divisions that determined your place in society. For the women, for the slaves, for the poor, life was often a battle for basic survival. Women had little to no rights, their existence confined largely to the home, while slaves were the backbone of Greek society, working tirelessly with little hope of ever gaining freedom. And yet, in the midst of all this hardship, the ancient Greeks managed to create one of the most enduring legacies in human history: democracy, philosophy, art, and architecture. They built the very foundations of Western civilization while enduring unimaginable daily struggles. They found meaning in a world full of chaos and hardship. They questioned everything, and through that questioning, they gave us the tools to understand the world in ways we never could have imagined before. So why are we here tonight, drifting into slumber as we ponder ancient Greece? Because as we close our eyes and listen to the story of those who lived so long ago, we are reminded of how resilient the human spirit can be. Even when faced with the harshest of circumstances, their struggles were many, their comforts few, but they endured. They survived, they thrived, and in doing so, they shaped the world that would follow them. And now, as you drift off into your peaceful slumber, let us continue this journey back to a time where survival meant more than simply living. It meant fighting for every breath, every step, every moment of peace in a world that often seemed indifferent to your struggles. Because in ancient Greece, every day was a testament to human endurance, and the stories of their hardships are just as important as the glory we celebrate today. Let us relax. Let the images of ancient Greece fill your mind. And, as you settle deeper into rest, let the quietude of history bring you peace. The sun is already up, its light pouring through the cracks in your home like a relentless wave of warmth, turning your modest living space into a slow-cooking oven. You roll over, hoping for just a few more minutes of sleep, but the stone walls of your house offer no reprieve. There is no soft mattress to cushion your body, no down comforter to wrap yourself in. Instead, you are lying on a thin mat, maybe a straw-stuffed mattress if you're lucky, and the floor beneath you is cool, hard, and unforgiving. You can feel the heat already seeping in, the stones in the walls slowly exhaling the warmth they've absorbed since the first light of dawn. It is summer, after all. The heat doesn't wait for you to wake up, it's already here, and it's not interested in giving you a break. You rise from your sleeping mat, stretching the stiff muscles that have been twisting and turning all night in search of comfort. There is none, just the stubborn reality of your world, a world where comfort is an afterthought, a distant luxury reserved for the gods, and perhaps the wealthy few who can afford a little more than the bare minimum. In ancient Greece, life is about survival. It's about getting by, making do, and accepting the discomforts of the day as they come. There's no room for complaining here, at least not out loud. Complaining might get you an exasperated look from your neighbors or a slightly uncomfortable nudge from the family goat who's probably sleeping somewhere in the corner of your tiny home. Your house is made of mud bricks or rough stone, depending on how much you've managed to scrape together over the years. There are no fancy materials here, no insulation, no plush carpets, no double-glazed windows to keep the heat out or the cold in. Just simple, rough-hewn walls that do their best to hold up against the elements, though they're clearly not winning the battle. You glance around the room, taking in the simplicity of your surroundings. A wooden table sits in one corner, its surface worn smooth from years of use. There are no chairs to sit on, just cushions or mats scattered on the floor where you and your family can gather to eat, talk, or bicker about who left the door open again. The walls are bare except for a few pots and jars, the occasional woven basket hanging from the ceiling, and perhaps a stray olive branch for decoration. The floor is made of packed earth, which in summer seems to radiate a warmth of its own, like the entire house is quietly boiling beneath you. Your home has no glass windows. Instead, wooden shutters stand guard against the outside world. At least, that's the theory. In practice, these shutters often seem to allow more goats than breezes to enter, especially when the wind decides to take a turn for the worse. There's no such thing as personal space in ancient Greece, unless of course you count the corner where the family goat has made its bed. But even then there's little hope of solitude. The room is small, the air thick with the smell of whatever meal you cooked last night, the lingering scent of olive oil, and the unmistakable tang of the animals that share your quarters. And in case you forgot, there's always the heat, the unbearable, relentless heat. As you rise to your feet, you can feel it settling into your bones, wrapping around you like an invisible cloak, refusing to let go. The stone walls of your home, which in winter were a welcome barrier against the cold, now feel like an enemy. They absorb the sun's rays and release them back into the air, turning your humble abode into a furnace. It's almost too much to bear how quickly the temperature rises, how heavy the air becomes with each passing hour. You glance toward the window, hoping for even the slightest breath of fresh air. Instead, all you see is the harsh, glaring sunlight and the faint outline of the street beyond, where life is already in full swing. The goats are bleating, the marketplace is buzzing, and somewhere in the distance, a dog is barking at something that likely doesn't exist. Life in ancient Greece begins early, whether you're ready for it or not. But that's how it is here. You have no choice but to wake up, rise, and face the day. No alarms, no snooze buttons, no gentle hum of an air-conditioned room to ease you into consciousness. The only thing that gets you out of bed is the rising sun and the heavy heat that follows it. There's no time to linger in the cool comfort of a soft bed, no indulgence in the slow pace of the morning. You've got work to do, and the world won't wait for you to finish sleeping. As you shuffle towards the door, you notice the coolness of the stone floor beneath your bare feet. It's a small moment of relief, a fleeting one, but one that reminds you how precious these little comforts are in your world. There are no luxuries in ancient Greece. There is no running water, no modern plumbing, no private bathrooms to retreat to. Instead, your daily routine involves a trip to the public fountain, or, if you're in a rural area, a long trek to the nearby well. Carrying heavy clay jars balanced on your shoulders, You move slowly, praying that you don't trip and spill your water. Because here, there is no such thing as a quick run to the store or a convenient faucet to turn on. If you want water, you have to go get it, and you'd better hope you don't drop the jar, or you'll be carrying the weight of a week's worth of back pain for nothing. There's no water to wash up with, either. No private showers, no hot water, no luxury of fresh linens to change into at the start of the day. You might splash your face with whatever water you've managed to bring back from the fountain, rub a little olive oil on your skin, and scrape it off with a strigil, a curved metal blade that, in theory, removes the dirt and sweat. In practice, though, you're left feeling slightly less greasy but still no cleaner than before. There's no privacy in this process, no bathroom rituals, no locking the door for a moment of solitude. Instead, you're surrounded by your family, your neighbors, and perhaps a goat or two. The concept of personal space has not yet been invented in ancient Greece. Here, everything is shared: the good, the bad, and the stinky. Once you're done, if you can call it that, the day begins in earnest. The sun beats down relentlessly, the temperature rising with each passing moment. It's a constant, heavy presence that follows you wherever you go. The heat is your companion, your adversary, and your ever-present reminder that survival in this world requires a certain resilience, a toughness that is molded by necessity. There are no soft pillows, no climate-controlled spaces, no escape from the elements. Your home, your body, and your very existence are constantly shaped and reshaped by the climate you live in. As you step out into the world, you feel the heat instantly. The stone streets burn under your bare feet, the air thick with dust and the faint smell of animals and food. There's no protection from the sun, no hats, no sunscreen. You'll be lucky if you find a bit of shade along the way. The ancient Greeks didn't have the luxury of modern conveniences like air conditioning, sunscreen, or even comfortable shoes. They simply endured. But even as the heat presses in, you move forward, doing what needs to be done. You've got chores to take care of, water to fetch, food to prepare, animals to tend to. Life doesn't stop, even when the sun beats down and the air is too thick to breathe. In a way, this is what defines life in ancient Greece. There's no time to be anything other than practical. You wake up, you face the day, you survive. And through it all, you continue to live, to struggle, and to endure. So, as the sun climbs higher in the sky and you begin your day, remember this: life in ancient Greece is not a tale of grandeur or elegance. It's a story of resilience, of people enduring in a world that doesn't always make room for comfort or convenience. They lived in simple homes, shared space with animals, and faced the unrelenting forces of nature every single day. Yet, despite it all, they carried on because that's what life demanded. And in doing so, they built a civilization that still echoes through the ages. You may not have the strength to last a day in ancient Greece, but those who did, somehow, found meaning in the struggle. The sun has already begun its relentless climb into the sky, and the air is thick with the smell of heat and dust. You're awake, there's no snooze button, no cozy blankets to hide under, no soft pillow to sink into. The heat from the stone walls of your house is already making itself known, creeping into your bones like a persistent, unwelcome guest. Your body is sticky with sweat from a night of restless sleep, and the very first thought that crosses your mind is, I need water. But here's the thing. There's no convenient faucet to turn on, no automatic cold shower to jump into. This is ancient Greece, where running water is a luxury reserved for the gods, and even they might think twice about it. Instead, you've got two options. You can make the trek to the public fountain if you live near one, or if you're in the countryside, you'll be hauling water from a nearby well, an exhausting daily ritual that's as much a part of your routine as breathing itself. So, you get up, stretch the aches from your body, and begin the task that waits for you every day. There's no escaping it if you want to survive this day. You'll have to fetch that water. But before you even step outside, you have to deal with the immediate inconvenience that comes with living in a world with no plumbing hygiene. And oh, hygiene in ancient Greece is, well, it's not quite what you might hope for. It's a far cry from the self-care routines we cherish today, with their fluffy towels, luxurious body washes, and aromatic candles. No, in ancient Greece, you've got olive oil, a strigil, and the faintest sense of what might be considered cleanliness. You gather yourself for the walk to the fountain, adjusting your tunic, which, let's be honest, is sticking to you in all the wrong places, thanks to the sweat that is already soaked through it. You might have spent most of the night trying to get comfortable, but the sticky, humid air outside will remind you that comfort is not a concept the Greeks are familiar with. You move quickly to the door, hoping for a slight breeze, or at least a sliver of shade. But there's none to be found, just the relentless heat, pushing you forward like an invisible hand on your back. The streets outside are just as unforgiving as your home. You step over the rough stone road, dodging the occasional goat or rooster, trying your best not to step in something unpleasant. It's not unusual to see people trudging to the public fountain with heavy clay jars balanced on their shoulders, a chore that will require multiple trips. The jar is so heavy that your shoulders ache after the first few steps, and you silently curse the fact that you've chosen this life, a life that demands so much physical labor, so little comfort, and even less privacy. As you near the fountain, you can already see the crowd gathering, mostly women and children, some talking in hushed tones, others simply trying to stay cool in the small shade that the surrounding buildings provide. When it's finally your turn to fill your jar, you can't help but notice the fact that there's no sense of personal space. The Greeks didn't have the luxury of privacy, at least not in the way we understand it. Instead, people live in tight quarters, and their days are spent side by side, each task shared with everyone in the neighborhood. There's no sense of me time in ancient Greece. Instead, you're always surrounded by someone else, whether it's family, friends, or the inevitable goats wandering too close for comfort. After hauling your jar full of water back to your home, the next step is cleaning up. And, as you've probably guessed, the process is far from relaxing. You're not walking into a cool bathroom with fluffy towels waiting for you. No, this is ancient Greece, where cleaning up means rubbing olive oil on your skin and scraping it off with a metal blade called a strigil. It sounds more like a medieval torture device than a tool for self-care. But trust me, this is your life now. You begin by pouring some olive oil onto your hands and rubbing it onto your skin, hoping to gather the sweat, the dirt, and whatever else might have accumulated from your night of fitful sleep. The oil is thick and sticky, but it's your only option for getting the grime off your body. In a way, it's kind of like using a moisturizer, except that, unlike modern lotions, the oil has no pleasant scent. It just adds another layer of grease to your already sticky body. Once the oil is evenly spread, you grab your strigil, which looks more like an ancient version of a dull blade than any kind of beauty tool. It's curved, made of metal, and has a sharp edge, designed for scraping the oil and with it the dirt and sweat off your body. You press the edge of the strigil against your skin and pull it along the surface, scraping off the thick, oily residue. It's less about cleanliness and more about removing the grime of daily life. The process is uncomfortable at best, and at worst, you're left feeling less than refreshed. But that's your reality. As you work your way through the scraping process, you can't help but notice the complete lack of privacy. There's no private bath, no closed-door moments of solitude. Everyone in your household is in the same room, dealing with the same sweaty, uncomfortable process. No soft music, no calming sense of lavender or eucalyptus, just the harsh scrape of metal against skin, the oily residue, and the sense that everyone can see exactly what you're doing. Even the family goat doesn't seem to mind getting in on the action. At least, it doesn't run away as you work. So you take that as a sign that perhaps it's a little too used to the whole thing. When you're finally done, you glance at yourself in the small, cracked mirror, or more likely, a shiny bit of metal, and you can't help but feel, well, less grimy. You've certainly removed some dirt, but the process leaves you feeling more like you've just gone through a wrestling match with an olive tree than anything resembling self-care. There's no sense of rejuvenation here. There's no refresh button to press after a long, exhausting night. You're left with the same tired body, the same layers of discomfort, and yet the day has only just begun. You wonder, briefly, how the great philosophers of ancient Greece managed to focus on lofty ideas about ethics and the universe, while knowing that this kind of primitive hygiene was the price of doing so. How could Socrates sit around discussing the nature of justice while his tunic clung to his body from the sweat of the morning's labor? How could Plato ponder the forms while trying to scrape olive oil off his skin with a metal blade? The grand ideas seem a little less divine now, don't they? But as you finish up, you can't help but think that this must have been the essence of ancient Greek life. In between all the philosophies and the democratic debates, there was real, gritty, physical survival. It wasn't all idealistic speeches and intellectual conversation. No, at its core, daily life was about enduring. It was about making do with what you had and finding meaning in the struggle. After all, if you could survive the discomforts of the morning routine, perhaps you could survive anything. With your body, however clean or not prepared for the day, you head to your next task. You've got to fetch more water, feed the animals, start on your work, and maybe, if you're lucky, catch a glimpse of the philosophers debating in the agora. But let's be real, today will likely be just like yesterday. It will be hot, it will be exhausting, and it will be full of the same uncomfortable, unsophisticated realities that make up ancient Greek life. But that's life. It's not the cleanliness we dream of today, nor the privacy we crave, but it's a life of endurance. In ancient Greece, you learned how to deal with discomfort because discomfort was the default. And if you could survive that, then maybe, just maybe, you were ready to tackle the bigger questions of life. And when the sun starts to set, after a long day of hard work, you'll realize that despite the discomfort, despite the struggle, you made it. And that in itself is a kind of triumph. You didn't need running water, a soft bed, or personal privacy. You only needed the strength to face the day, one scraped off layer at a time. The morning sun has already beaten down on you with the usual intensity, pushing you into action whether you're ready or not. You've hauled water, you've scraped yourself clean with the strigil, and now it's time for the most essential part of the day, breakfast. Ah, yes, the meal that kicks off your day of hard labor, sweat, and more hard labor. But before you think of a nice steaming bowl of porridge or a comforting piece of fresh fruit, let me stop you right there. In ancient Greece, breakfast was not a meal to be savored, nor was it something to look forward to. No, breakfast in ancient Greece was about getting the bare essentials into your body, just enough to get you through until the real meal of the day, which, spoiler alert, would be just as minimal. You make your way to the table, if you can even call it that. It's a rough-hewn slab of wood, uneven and slightly warped, but it does the job. No fancy breakfast nooks here, no Pinterest-worthy breakfast spreads. Just a table, a couple of wooden stools, and a handful of people in your household who are probably just as tired, sweaty, and grumpy as you are. If you're lucky, there might be a bowl of barley bread, or maza, waiting for you. If you're unlucky, that bread will be stale, dry, and about as appetizing as a rock. But then again, it's not like you've got a lot of options. This bread, which was considered the ancient Greek breakfast staple, is dense and hard to chew, as if the gods themselves conspired to make sure your first meal of the day was a challenge to both your teeth and your patience. Barley was the grain of choice, in ancient Greece cheap, abundant, and a reliable source of sustenance. But oh, it's as far from fluffy, warm loaves of bread as you can get. It's practically a food in the form of a brick, baked either in the ashes of last night's fire or on the hottest stones you could find. If you've ever bitten into a stale granola bar that's been sitting in the sun for a few days, you have a pretty accurate idea of what this tastes like. Dense, flavorless, and probably a little stale even when it's fresh. You dunk it in water, and if you're feeling adventurous, maybe some wine, and hope that it doesn't crack your teeth in the process. You chew, you swallow, and you repeat, knowing that this is the best you can hope for in a world where food is more about survival than enjoyment. Let's take a moment to reflect on just how far removed this is from the comfortable breakfasts we know today. No eggs sizzling in a pan, no fresh fruit plucked from a nearby orchard, no hot coffee warming your hands as you take that first sip of the morning. No, this is barley bread or maza dipped in watered-down wine. Oh, and about that wine, it's not because you're in the mood for a little buzz with your breakfast, that's for sure. Water, you see, was considered unsafe in ancient Greece. There was no filtration system, no modern plumbing to ensure that the water you were drinking wasn't contaminated. So, what do you do when you're thirsty, but you're afraid to drink the water? You dilute it with wine, of course. The ancient Greeks drank wine with nearly every meal, and this was no exception. The wine, watered down to make it more drinkable, became your beverage of choice, a survival tactic rather than a choice of taste. You didn't drink wine because you liked the taste. You drank it because it was the safest option to hydrate without the risk of consuming something potentially lethal. Ah, the joys of ancient hygiene. So, there you are, dunking your barley bread in this diluted, murky wine water concoction, and you try your best not to think about how awful it tastes. It's more about the ritual, the act of sustenance, than about enjoyment. It's functional. It gets the job done. You chew through the dense bread, swallowing it in chunks, hoping that maybe, just maybe, there's a fig or an olive hidden somewhere in the mix. But you won't be so lucky. The average ancient Greek had no such luxuries. If you were wealthy, perhaps you'd get a small serving of goat cheese or a couple of figs. But those treats were for the privileged few, the ones who could afford more than the bare essentials. For the rest of you, it's the bread and wine water combo that will fuel your morning. It's enough to get you moving, to give you the energy to start your day of backbreaking work and endless chores. But it's certainly not a meal that's going to lift your spirits. In fact, you might feel a little more sluggish after breakfast than you did before, but that's the reality of ancient Greek dining. It's about endurance, not indulgence. Now, let's talk about who's at the table with you while you're struggling to choke down your breakfast. Family, perhaps? Yes, but not in the cozy, intimate way we imagine family meals today. No, breakfast is a communal affair in ancient Greece. But there's one small problem. The family is often divided. Women and children, for the most part, eat separately from the men. It's a societal structure that reflects the deeply ingrained gender roles of the time. Women, especially in the more conservative city-states like Athens, weren't expected to participate in public life, and certainly not in the shared meals of the menfolk. The men eat together, probably after a long day of work, philosophical debates, or military service, while women and children are relegated to their own corner, eating their maza and sipping on their watered-down wine in the privacy of their own space. The social divide is real, even at the breakfast table. There's no time for leisurely conversation around this table, no time for warm pleasantries or enjoying the company of those you love. This is a functional meal. Get it done and get on with the day. The men may be off to the marketplace, off to the assembly hall, or to military training, and the women and children have their own chores to attend to. The idea of relaxing over breakfast, of enjoying the simple pleasures of a quiet morning, doesn't exist. There is no sitting down to enjoy a cup of coffee or engaging in long discussions about what's for dinner. There's work to be done, and this simple, austere meal is just the fuel to get you through the next few hours. So, as you swallow the last bite of your barley bread and sip the last drop of your wine water concoction, you realize that breakfast in ancient Greece isn't just about food, it's about survival. It's about getting through the day, one unappetizing mouthful at a time. The bread, though dense and unexciting, has done its job. It's given you just enough energy to face the day's challenges. Whether those challenges involve hauling more water, tending to animals, or preparing for a day of hard labor in the fields, this meal has provided you with just enough fuel to survive until the next one. There's no indulgence, no joy, no luxurious savoring of flavors. There's only necessity. And yet, despite the starkness of it all, there's something remarkably resilient about this breakfast. It's not about enjoying the food, it's about enduring, about pushing forward, and about making do with what little you have. This is the essence of ancient Greek life, a continual struggle to survive, to make meaning out of hardship, and to find strength in simplicity. And perhaps, in its own way, this simple breakfast is a reflection of that tough, unyielding, and ultimately designed to carry you through the trials of the day. With breakfast finally over, the sense of urgency lingers, just as it always does in ancient Greece. There's no time to savor or relax, no time to reflect on the meal or dream of better things. The day beckons, and there's work to be done. You clean up the remnants of your breakfast, knowing that the next task awaits and there's no time to waste. And so, like the generations before you, you get up from the table, push the last crumbs of barley bread aside, and prepare for the day ahead, one that promises as much sweat and toil as any before it. The harsh reality of breakfast in ancient Greece isn't just about what's on the table. It's about the world that demands you eat quickly, work harder, and never stop moving. But somehow, through it all, the Greeks managed to build a civilization that continues to shape our world today. You survived breakfast, a hearty meal of dense barley bread soaked in wine water, the kind of sustenance that keeps you upright long enough to face the day. But as you push yourself into the daily grind of ancient Greek life, there's one small issue that keeps popping up, reminding you of the time period you're living in. Hygiene, or rather, the complete lack of it. Let's be honest here. In modern times, a shower is practically a given. The moment you roll out of bed, you know you can refresh yourself with hot water, shampoo, soap, and that little blast of steam that comes with the first step under the shower head. It's an easy ritual, an indulgence, really. But in ancient Greece, hygiene is not a luxury. It's a survival tactic, a simple process of trying to remove enough of the day's grime to make it through to the next. No clean, crisp towels, no gentle lather of body wash, just a cold splash of water and some olive oil. No need for complicated rituals. Well, maybe a little complicated, but definitely no comfort. First off, forget the idea of modern baths. Public baths? Well, if you live in a city like Athens, maybe you'll find one tucked somewhere near the agora. But in rural areas, public baths are almost as rare as a summer breeze. In fact, even in the cities, baths are not the kind of place you visit for a leisurely soak in warm water. No, the baths are functional spaces, places to scrub yourself clean, or at least try to with cold water. There's no hot water flowing from a tap, no luxurious steam rooms to soothe your aching muscles. Instead, there's a communal basin of cold, possibly muddy water, and a handful of other sweaty, grimy individuals who are all in the same boat as you. It's less a peaceful, refreshing experience and more of a get in, get clean, and get out situation. Privacy is non-existent, and the idea of a hot, comforting bath is still a distant dream. Now, imagine yourself stepping into that public bath, joining a crowd of equally unimpressed Greeks, all huddled together in what can only be described as an uncomfortable, communal moment of cleaning. The water, at best, is tepid, and at worst, downright freezing, especially in the colder months. The concept of a refreshing dip is lost in the face of cold, unyielding water. You can't soak your body to relax. You can't let the water calm your muscles or warm your skin. You have one task, and one task only: get clean enough to face the rest of your day. So, you splash the water over yourself, and when you're done, you move on. Because there's no lingering luxury in this. There's no moment of peace. And as if the cold water wasn't enough, here's the real kicker. You don't even have soap. Soap, that sweet, soothing modern miracle, is still far in the future. There's no bottle of lavender-scented shampoo waiting for you by the tub. In ancient Greece, there's nothing to wash away the dirt, grime, and sweat you've been accumulating. Well, except for olive oil. That's right, olive oil. The ancient Greeks, masters of everything from philosophy to architecture, somehow also decided that rubbing their bodies with olive oil was the best way to clean up. It's not so much a cleanse as it is an ancient beauty ritual. So, while you might be hoping for a nice, relaxing scrub, the olive oil is your main line of defense. The method is simple, perhaps too simple. You pour a bit of olive oil onto your hands, rub it into your skin, and then this is the part that really gets interesting. You scrape it off with a strigil. This curved metal blade, sharp enough to scrape the oil off your body, was not exactly designed with comfort in mind. Think of it as an ancient exfoliator, only instead of a gentle scrub, you're getting the kind of cleaning that makes you wish you had stayed in bed for just 5 more minutes. You're essentially using the oil to trap the dirt, sweat, and grime on your skin, then scraping it away with the strigil. The result? A body that feels slightly less grimy, but certainly no more refreshed. It's a process that's more about survival than comfort. You don't leave the bath feeling rejuvenated. You leave feeling slightly less sticky than you did before. And that's the win. And let's not forget the social aspects of it all. The baths, the scrubbing, the oiling, it's all done in public, in the presence of your fellow Greeks. There's no privacy, no me time to unwind in the middle of your day. If you've got a body to clean, you'll be doing it in front of everyone else who needs the same. Sure, some might head to the baths for a quick scrub, but it's just as likely you'll end up chatting with your neighbor about the latest gossip or the price of olives at the market while scraping off the dirt of the day. There's no personal space, no quiet moments for reflection, just a sea of people, all scrubbing themselves down with olive oil and trying to get through the day with a little less grime on their bodies. The lack of privacy is something you start to get used to in ancient Greece. It's not just the baths that lack it. There's no real space for solitude or personal time. Your home is shared with your family, and sometimes with your animals too. Your eating spaces, your living spaces, your work spaces, all of it is done in close quarters. You've got no doors to hide behind, no private rooms to retreat to when you want to be alone with your thoughts. Everything, from the scraping of olive oil off your body to your family meals, is done in the open, shared with the people around you, whether you want it or not. The idea of personal space doesn't exist in this world. You're always in the company of someone else, always surrounded by others, and even when you go to clean yourself up, you're doing it in a crowd. And while the public bath might seem like the most extreme example, it's not the only place where the lack of hygiene becomes painfully apparent. Laundry, for instance, is no luxury experience either. It's a back-breaking chore. You wash your clothes by beating them against stones in the river, an incredibly inefficient process that guarantees your tunic will be slightly cleaner, but certainly no fresher by the end. If you're lucky, Your clothes might not even see water until the next festival season. Freshly laundered garments? Not in ancient Greece, just a dream. Instead, you walk around in garments that are likely worn, dirt-stained, and maybe a little less than fragrant. Now, let's talk about dental hygiene. It's safe to say that ancient Greeks weren't exactly concerned with their pearly whites. There are no toothbrushes, no toothpaste, and certainly no dental floss. In fact, if you want to get your teeth cleaned, you've got a couple of options. You can chew on a twig and hope for the best, or if you're feeling particularly fancy, you might rub your gums with crushed charcoal or rinse with vinegar. Yes, vinegar. If you're wealthy, maybe you've got access to a fancy mouthwash. But for the vast majority, it's more about putting up with what you've got than maintaining some kind of dental standard. Dental hygiene wasn't a priority, and the Greeks seem to have resigned themselves to this fact. And yet, even with all of this, the cold baths, the olive oil scrapes, the lack of personal space, the questionable mouth care, the ancient Greeks somehow managed to build one of the most influential civilizations the world has ever seen. Despite the primitive hygiene, despite the lack of personal luxuries, they created art, literature, and philosophy that continues to resonate with us today. They lived lives that, in many ways, we would find nearly unbearable, and yet they endured. They thrived. They built. They questioned. They debated. They may have lacked a few modern conveniences, but they had something far more important: resilience. The truth is, the Greeks didn't need pristine bodies or modern conveniences to build a civilization. They didn't need hot baths, fresh clothes, or perfect teeth. They had grit, perseverance, and a capacity to endure hardship that we can only imagine. And in that, they created a legacy that's lasted for millennia. So, while you may not want to trade your modern shower for a bucket of cold water and a scraping of olive oil, you can't help but admire how the Greeks made it work. They didn't just survive, they created meaning. They made their mark on history, and they left us with ideas that continue to shape the world we live in. And with that thought, you wash away the last remnants of olive oil from your skin and brace yourself for the next part of the day's journey, whatever that may be. The day is already unfolding, the relentless heat bearing down as you gather your energy to face yet another day in ancient Greece. You've eaten your breakfast, a mouthful of stale barley bread and watered-down wine, and you've survived the discomfort of your morning hygiene ritual, which left you feeling a little cleaner, but no less uncomfortable. But now comes the real test: dressing for the day. And let me tell you, ancient Greek fashion is about as practical as a sunburn in a desert. But in the world of ancient Greece, practicality took a back seat to tradition, style, and, well, the strange concept of comfort. So you step over to your wardrobe, or more accurately, a pile of clothes on the floor. This isn't a closet, mind you, or a well-organized drawer. No, this is ancient Greece, where your wardrobe consists of two oversized rectangles of linen, which you will somehow turn into clothing. That's right, clothing. Two rectangles of fabric. Welcome to the world of chiton and himation, the classic ancient Greek getup. You start by picking up the chiton, a long, flowing piece of linen, basically a huge, unshaped rectangle that's supposed to fit around your body. It's not tailored, it's not fitted. There's no seamstress here to help with the waistline or the bust. There's no such thing as fitting for your body type in ancient Greece. If you're lucky, the fabric is light enough that it won't make you feel like you're wearing a furnace. But most likely, it's heavier than you want and feels more like a blanket than a garment. You drape the chiton over your head, and as you do, you have to gather the excess fabric around your waist, fastening it with a belt or brooch. And that's where the fun begins. If you're feeling adventurous, or if you're trying to keep things dignified, you can pin the top of the chiton at your shoulders with a couple of brooches. They're sharp, shiny, and not particularly comfortable, but they get the job done. The chitin may or may not slide down your body during the day, but hey, that's just the price you pay for ancient Greek fashion. It's kind of like wearing a very loose, oversized tunic, except it's not designed to be casual. The linen doesn't breathe as much as you'd hope it would, especially in the heat of the Greek Sunday. So, by the time you're walking through the streets, the fabric clings to you in all the wrong places. Every time you move, you can feel the cool air trapped under the linen, followed by waves of sticky heat. Now, here's the kicker if you're a woman. You're not exactly thrilled about the idea of comfort in ancient Greece because there's no such thing as underwear. That's right, no underwear, no bras, nothing to hold you in or keep you comfortably covered beneath your tunic. You might be thinking, well, surely the Greeks were at least practical enough to have something like undergarments for comfort. Nope, just that bare, flowing linen. And if you thought that chitin was a bit too revealing or too clingy, then wait until you get to the himation, the second piece of your outfit, which is essentially just a giant square of linen that's draped over your shoulder and wrapped around your body. You can wear it like a toga if you want to keep up with the latest trends, but be warned, this is no fashion statement. It's more like a blanket you have to wrap around yourself with no real idea of how to keep it on. But the himation is what the Greeks wore when they wanted to be taken seriously. The problem is, you're not always looking your best while you're trying to figure out how to make this huge square of fabric stay on your body. You wrap it around yourself, pinning it at one shoulder, but halfway through the day, you're already struggling to keep it from falling off. The fabric is stiff, heavy, and not designed for comfort, and you're stuck with the harsh reality of having to adjust it every time the wind blows. The himation offers no shape, no elegance. It just hangs from your shoulders like a towel that's been thrown on you in a hurry. Not exactly the height of fashion, but it's what you've got. Let's pause here for a moment to appreciate just how impractical this whole outfit is. You're wrapped up in two pieces of fabric that are too large, too loose, and too clunky. You have no undergarments to help keep things in place, no shaping to ensure your body's comfortable, and no way to prevent the inevitable awkward shifting that happens every time you walk. The heat from the sun, the weight of the linen, and the constant battle with the fabric just to maintain some shred of dignity. It's a constant reminder that comfort was not a priority in ancient Greece. The Greeks might have invented democracy, philosophy, and some of the most profound works of art in history, but when it came to clothing, not so much. In fact, the lack of proper tailoring means that you're often left struggling to keep your clothes in place. One wrong move, one gust of wind, and you're suddenly revealing more of your body than you intended. And while public nudity wasn't exactly shocking in Greek society, especially for men in gymnasiums or athletes competing in the Olympics, being unintentionally exposed while going about your daily business is far from ideal. But in ancient Greece, what you wear is more about symbolism than comfort. A chitin and himation signal that you're part of the Greek way of life, that you belong to this ancient civilization of thinkers, soldiers, and artists. No need for tailored pants or fitted shirts. This was a world where you wear your identity on your sleeve, or rather, on your uncomfortably pinned together linen. You might find yourself wishing for something more practical, something that stays in place, that doesn't ride up or bunch in all the wrong places. But remember, this is the reality of life in ancient Greece. The clothes are a reflection of a society that values ideals like simplicity, modesty, and utilitarianism. There's no space for lavish luxury here, no room for personal expression through your wardrobe. You wear what everyone else wears, whether you like it or not. And while you might dream of a world with fitted clothing, comfortable undergarments, and fabrics that don't chafe, this is what you get. The lack of underwear becomes a constant reminder of just how far removed you are from the comforts of the modern world. In a society that embraced open-air gyms, free-flowing conversations, and public nudity as a sign of healthy masculinity, the idea of something as simple as underwear was almost absurd. What did the Greeks need to wear something underneath their tunics? The chafing, the discomfort, the need to adjust every 5 minutes. They probably saw all of that as just part of the deal. The Greeks lived life in the open, unrestrained by the modesty concerns that would plague future generations. They celebrated the human body and embraced its natural state, for better or worse. Clothing in ancient Greece was less about protection or comfort and more about a shared identity, a way to say, I am Greek and I follow the customs of my people. And so, as you finish your morning routine of dressing in oversized linen rectangles and securing them with makeshift belts or brooches, you take a step back and reflect on how strange, yet strangely fitting, it is. The clothes you're wearing are as imperfect as the life you're living, but they are part of who you are. The chafing and shifting fabric aren't just physical annoyances, they're reminders that in ancient Greece, survival wasn't about comfort. It was about enduring the discomforts, the struggles, the harsh realities of life, all while trying to keep your dignity intact in the face of it all. With your chitin and himation now firmly in place, or at least as firmly as they're going to get you head out into the day, the heat will bear down, the fabric will shift, and you'll probably have to adjust things every few steps. But none of that matters, because in this world, it's not about looking perfect. It's about getting through the day, about making it to the next task, the next challenge, and the next uncomfortable piece of clothing you'll have to wear. And just like that, you're ready for whatever comes next. Now that you've dressed for the day, probably more out of necessity than any sense of style, you step outside and into the blistering reality of ancient Greece. You might think that life in the cradle of Western civilization would be marked by some level of ease, especially considering all the intellectual, artistic, and architectural wonders they've produced. But as you look around, you quickly realize that the life of an average Greek wasn't exactly glamorous. There's no royal carriage waiting for you to take you to the agora, no cushioned seats or cool air-conditioned rides. Instead, you've got two things to look forward to: hot stone streets and the relentless Athenian Sunday. Your day begins with what could generously be called a commute. But let's not kid ourselves. It's no leisurely stroll down tree-lined streets with a cool breeze in your hair. No, this is the ancient Greek version of getting from point A to point B, and it's every bit as uncomfortable as you'd imagine. Imagine waking up to a stone-cold house, already uncomfortable from the night's sleep, on a thin mat or straw-stuffed mattress, and then stepping into a world where the heat seems to radiate up from the very earth itself. The ground is made of stone, the roads are dirt, and your sandals, if you even have them, are doing little to protect your poor, unprepared feet. You're barefoot. Let's just be clear about that. Forget about the cushioned, comfy shoes we now take for granted. No sneakers, no loafers, no flip-flops. You're walking barefoot, and not just on any surface. You're walking on hot stones, uneven cobblestones, and dirt roads trampled by goats and livestock. Have you ever stepped on a hot stone in the middle of summer? It's like the earth itself is punishing you for existing. Every step feels like you're walking on the surface of a hot griddle, the heat searing into your bare soles. The road is unforgiving, and your feet are doing their best to keep you upright without losing your dignity or your skin. You can feel the stone burn through the thin skin of your feet, but there's no choice. The only way to get anywhere is by enduring it. There's no shade, no relief from the heat, and certainly no well-paved roads to make the journey easier. Every step is a reminder that life in ancient Greece was a brutal affair. No soft carpet beneath your feet, no smooth paths leading you to your destination. Just raw, unforgiving terrain and your willingness to tough it out. And don't even think about complaining. In ancient Greece, there was no such thing as a cushy commute or a way to escape the heat. This is the world of hardship, of enduring discomfort for the sake of necessity. And in your case, Necessity is getting to the market or the agora or wherever it is that you've got to be to fulfill your daily duties. Your feet, blistered and raw by the end of the journey, are just the price you pay for survival in this sun-drenched world. Now, imagine this journey. Under the relentless Athenian Sunday, the sky is clear, unclouded, and the sun feels like it's aiming directly at you. No protection, no sunscreen, no wide-brimmed hat or stylish sunglasses to shield your eyes. Just you, your linen chitin, and your exposed skin baking under the weight of the midday heat. Sure, you might have seen someone in a wide-brimmed hat or maybe a farmer in a sun-drenched field with a bit of cloth wrapped around their head. But for the average Greek citizen, sun protection is a distant dream. This is the same sun that bakes the stone roads and dries up any hint of moisture, leaving everything feeling parched. You can already feel your skin heating up, the sweat beginning to form at your temples, slipping down your neck and staining the edges of your linen robe. It's not the graceful, dewy glow of a person strolling through a breezy park. No, it's more like the desperate, sticky sheen of someone trying to survive in a sauna. You're sweating, your skin's turning a little pink, and you're already regretting the decision to leave the house without finding shade. But this is the daily grind in ancient Greece. There is no such thing as sun safety. No one is telling you to slather on some SPF or advising you to seek shelter under the shade of a tree or building. In fact, there's a strange sense of pride in enduring the Sunday. The Greeks didn't exactly consider themselves to be overly sensitive to the elements. They didn't live in an air-conditioned world where you could retreat to cool down. Instead, they embraced the heat. They faced it head-on and wore it like a badge of honor. And let's not forget, there's no water bottle in hand, no hydration packs to keep you going. If you're lucky, you might pass a public fountain on your way, but most of the time, you'll have to stop at the well to haul some water. Carrying heavy, clay jugs, you'll make your way back to your humble abode, hoping the trip wasn't for nothing and that you won't drop it halfway home. If you're lucky, the well water is drinkable. If not, you'll be heading to the market to grab some more diluted wine. But at least you're hydrated barely. Now, here's the kicker. This is not a short commute. The ancient Greeks were walkers. There were no cars or bikes to whisk you around, and most people didn't have the luxury of horses or carts to carry their goods, let alone themselves. No, you walk. All day, everywhere. From your home to the agora, to the temples, to the market, to whatever else you're required to do in your day. It's all on foot. Every journey feels like a mini marathon, especially when you consider that the roads are poorly maintained and often blocked by various other unfortunate souls doing the same thing you are. Add to that the fact that the Greeks were not fond of privacy. They didn't just travel from one place to another. They mingled, they chatted, and they bumped into their fellow Greeks along the way. There's no personal space while you're walking the streets. In fact, you'll likely find yourself rubbing elbows with a merchant, an aristocrat, or, if you're particularly unlucky, a philosopher who won't stop talking about justice. It's the Greek version of rush hour. Hot, uncomfortable, and full of people who all seem to have their own agenda, but somehow still manage to make the journey feel like a group affair. Even your daily commute becomes a spectacle, a little soap opera where the characters are all too hot, too sweaty, and all in the same situation, just trying to survive the day. So, after what seems like hours of dragging your aching feet across the sun-scorched streets, you finally reach your destination. You stand in the shadow of a grand column or beneath a vendor's awning, taking in a moment of coolness, a small reprieve from the constant heat and the uncomfortable journey. And it's there, in that brief moment of shade, that you realize this was just the start of your day. You've barely made it to the agora, barely survived your commute through the heat and dust, and yet it feels like you've accomplished something. You've made it. You've survived another blistering, uncomfortable journey, and now you're ready to face the challenges that lie ahead in the bustling heart of Athens. Because in ancient Greece, that's what it's all about: survival. The discomforts, the hardships, the sunburns, and the aching feet are all just part of the price you pay for living in a civilization that gave the world philosophy, democracy, and more than a few annoying philosophers who refuse to stop questioning everything. As you step into the agora and begin your day's work, you can't help but feel a sense of pride. You're still here. You've survived the commute. You've made it through the harshest of the Athenian Sunday. And that's saying something, even if your skin is already starting to peel. So, onward you go, each blistered step a reminder that in ancient Greece, comfort was a luxury reserved for the few. And the rest of you? You get to fight the elements, walk barefoot on goat-trodden roads, and battle against the sun, all while trying to get a little work done and pretend that this was just another perfectly normal day. Because it was. The Athenian sun beats down relentlessly, and after you've spent your morning slogging through the torturous commute, dressed in your impractical linen rectangles, and experiencing every last drop of discomfort that the ancient world has to offer, you might think that your biggest challenge of the day has come and gone. But that's where you'd be wrong. Because in ancient Greece, there is no retirement, no taking it easy, and certainly no escape from responsibility. In fact, there is one major duty that you can never dodge, no matter how hard you try: military service. Now, don't be fooled into thinking that you'll have the luxury of lounging around Athens, debating philosophy with Socrates, or enjoying the latest Greek tragedy. No, the reality of being a citizen in ancient Greece, especially if you happen to be a free male, is that at some point you'll be called upon to pick up a weapon and fight. Military service is not just a duty, it's a fundamental part of your civic identity. And whether you're from Athens, Sparta, or any other Greek city-state, you can bet your barley bread breakfast that you'll spend a good chunk of your life preparing to defend it. The idea of civic duty is deeply woven into the fabric of ancient Greek society. This wasn't a time when you could simply choose not to serve in the military. Nope. The obligation to serve wasn't just a matter of personal choice, it was a sacred responsibility. From a very young age, every free male citizen was expected to be trained to fight. Whether you were in Athens, where you trained more for strategy and discipline, or in Sparta, where your existence was basically one long military boot camp, you had no choice in the matter. In fact, the only real option you had was to figure out how best to survive it. For those of you in Athens, the process was slightly less brutal, but no less demanding. In the grand city of Athens, where democracy was born and philosophers debated ethics under the shade of olive trees, you would start your military training in your late teens. Athenian males were expected to serve in the military for about 2 years of intense, hands-on training. And though this training might not have been as punishing as the famed Spartan system, it was still no walk in the park. Imagine, as a young man, the day you're called to serve. You're pulled from your relatively carefree days of learning philosophy and participating in the democratic process. You put down your scrolls, abandon your arguments on justice, and brace yourself for something far more physical. You begin with basic drills, marching, forming battle lines, and learning the complex formations of the phalanx, the famous Greek battle formation where soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder, shields locked in a wall of bronze and iron. The idea is to train you in teamwork, discipline, and, most importantly, survival in battle. You are taught to fight not as an individual but as part of a larger collective. Your survival depends on the man next to you, as much as it does on your own skill with a spear. But even in the relative comfort of Athens, the pressure to perform is immense. A failure to keep in formation could mean the collapse of the entire line, leaving your comrades vulnerable to enemy forces. And in a world constantly at war, be it with Sparta, Persia, or neighboring city-states, the importance of being prepared is paramount. The Athenians were not just about thinking, they were also about fighting when necessary. And so, your daily routine and training becomes a balance between intellect and combat skills. You train in the art of war as much as you do in the art of public speaking. However, if you were born in Sparta, your military service begins long before you even understand what freedom means. The Spartan system is a whole different beast altogether. A brutal, unrelenting machine that grinds its citizens into shape from the moment they can walk. Spartan children are not raised with the expectation of becoming philosophers or artists. They are raised to be warriors. The moment a baby is born, the elders of Sparta will inspect it for signs of strength and vitality. If the child is deemed weak or unhealthy, it's either left to die or abandoned to the elements. Spartan society is about survival of the fittest, and if you can't handle the pressure, then you're not fit to be a part of it. As a young boy, your entire life revolves around the rigorous and often brutal training designed to turn you into a soldier. By the time you are 7 years old, you are sent to the Agoj, the state-sponsored education and training program that aims to prepare you for war, and it's not for the faint of heart. Think of it as boot camp, but without any of the comforts of modern day. You are not coddled. In fact, quite the opposite. You are deliberately pushed to your limits in order to build both physical strength and mental resilience. The training begins with starvation. Yes, you heard that right. Spartan children are intentionally given less food than they need. The idea behind this cruel deprivation is to teach you discipline and endurance. The hope is that you will learn to fight hunger, adapt to hardship, and become self-sufficient in your quest to survive. And, if you're lucky enough to get food, it won't be anything like a feast. Instead, you might get a small ration of barley bread, stale and tasteless, and maybe some vegetables. It's just enough to keep you alive, not enough to keep you comfortable. Along with hunger, there are the constant whippings. Yes, you'll be beaten regularly. The Spartan education system believes in the power of physical punishment, and it's used not just to discipline you, but to instill the idea that pain is something to be conquered, not avoided. You are taught to endure suffering without showing weakness. The whippings are designed to break you down, both physically and mentally, only to build you back up into a stronger version of yourself. Spartan boys are pushed to their limits until they develop an iron will and the skills to fight with brutal efficiency. But it's not all about punishment. There is, of course, a sense of camaraderie among the young warriors. They train together, sleep together, and even engage in mock battles, where teamwork is critical. By the time you are a teenager, your life is all about one thing: war. There is no room for leisure, no time for reading philosophy, no moments spent contemplating the meaning of life. Instead, your existence is consumed with physical preparation, learning to fight with weapons, training in formations, and rehearsing military tactics until they become second nature. But here's the catch. Even if you survive the brutal Agoge system, you're still not free. Even after you've been turned into a hardened warrior, military service is a lifelong commitment. If you're lucky enough to survive the grueling trials of childhood and adolescence, you're expected to continue your service into adulthood. Your role in Spartan society is that of a soldier, and that's all you'll ever be. There's no retirement in Sparta. Even when you reach your 30s or 40s, you're still called upon to defend the state. In fact, Spartan warriors were expected to be in service for most of their adult lives, always ready for the next battle, always ready to defend their city-state. And battles come often. Ancient Greece was a volatile place, full of rivalries, shifting alliances, and constant warfare. Whether it's fighting for dominance over neighboring city-states, repelling invasions from the Persian Empire, or engaging in the endless conflict with Sparta's main rival, Athens, war is an ever-present fact of life. The Greek world is a tinderbox of tension, and the match is always ready to be struck. From the moment you step into the military system, there is no end in sight. The fear of war never really goes away because there's always a new conflict on the horizon. Even in times of peace, the constant state of readiness, always training, always preparing, is part of the Greek way of life. This is not a world where you can just sit back and relax. It's a world where you're expected to constantly sharpen your sword, keep your shield polished, and be prepared for the next battle. And if you're lucky enough to avoid death in the field of battle, you'll be left with scars both physical and mental that will remind you of the constant threat of war that looms over every Greek citizen. The idea of duty is so ingrained in your life that there is no escape. Even as a civilian, you are always on alert, always conscious of the looming possibility that the next war is just around the corner. As you reflect on your training, your daily routines, and the ever-present threat of war, you realize that in ancient Greece, survival was the ultimate goal. The military, whether you were in Athens, Sparta, or any other Greek city-state, was the backbone of society. Your duty to serve in the military wasn't just about defending your home, it was about upholding the very principles that made Greek civilization what it was: strength, discipline, unity, and the resilience to withstand whatever hardships lay ahead. You may have wanted a peaceful life, filled with philosophical debates and quiet strolls through the agora. But the reality of ancient Greece is that you are, first and foremost, a soldier. And whether you like it or not, your life is shaped by the constant duty to protect your city, your fellow citizens, and the ideals that make Greece what it is. There's no escape from it. The military is as much a part of your identity as your citizenship. And as you strap on your shield, take up your spear, and march toward the battlefield, you understand that this is not just a duty, it is the essence of what it means to be Greek. If you thought your life as a citizen in ancient Greece was tough, I'd like to introduce you to a whole different level of hardship. You've managed to survive the scorching sun, the long commute, and the relentless training to become a soldier. But for women in ancient Greece, the real struggle begins from the moment they are born. In a society that prides itself on democracy, philosophy, and military might, the reality for women is something entirely different, something far less egalitarian, and far more confined. Let's take a moment to step into their shoes, or rather, to take a step back into their homes, where their lives are spent behind closed doors, far from the glory of public life. In this world of grand temples and public debates, women are, for the most part, invisible. They have no political voice, no right to vote, no say in who leads or how the laws are made. If you're a woman, you don't get to participate in the democratic process. In fact, you don't even get to walk freely through the agora without a male escort to make sure you don't accidentally offend someone with your unchaperoned presence. This is a world where a woman's place is in the home, and her value is often tied to how well she can manage the household and bear children. Your life is less about intellectual debates or military conquests, and more about domestic chores, child rearing, and keeping the household running smoothly. Now, I'm not saying that women in ancient Greece weren't important, far from it. They were vital to the functioning of society. After all, without women, there would be no future generations, no continuation of the family line, no heirs to inherit property. But this importance doesn't translate into freedom or rights. In fact, the rights you have are incredibly limited. The very fact that you are a woman means that you are expected to focus on domestic responsibilities and, above all, stay out of the public eye. You might wake up in the morning with the weight of centuries of expectation on your shoulders. Your family, perhaps a husband, a few children, and maybe some slaves, are all looking to you to manage the household. If you're wealthy enough, you might have some servants or slaves to help with the cooking and cleaning. But for the most part, it's on you to ensure that the home is well kept, the meals are prepared, the children are raised, and the husband is content. These domestic duties are your responsibility, and there is little room for anything else. You're expected to be the caretaker, the nurturer, and the organizer of the home, but not the voice of the household in the public sphere. And when it comes to marriage, things aren't much better. Women in ancient Greece marry young, often as teenagers, and their marriages are typically arranged by their fathers. Forget the idea of romantic love. Your marriage is less about personal choice and more about securing alliances, ensuring the survival of the family, and perhaps improving your social standing. You don't get to choose your partner. In fact, most women are married to men who are much older than they are. These men are usually established in their careers, whether that be in politics, the military, or business. And the idea is that the woman will help continue the family line and maintain the household. If you're lucky, your husband might be kind, but chances are you'll spend your days working to support his career, his ambitions, and his family. Your happiness? Well, that's not really part of the equation. Imagine, if you will, the quiet monotony of your day. You wake up early, likely before the sun rises, and start your day by tending to the needs of your husband and children. You're not expected to engage in intellectual conversations about philosophy or discuss the latest works of the great playwrights. No, your day is spent in the kitchen, grinding grain for bread, fetching water, weaving cloth, or making sure the household is stocked with essentials. If you're lucky, you get to supervise the slaves, if your family has any, or instruct them on the best ways to keep things running smoothly. But make no mistake, your world is confined to the house, and your ability to influence the wider world is negligible at best. There is no joy in picking out a new outfit for the day or enjoying the comforts of modern leisure. Instead, you wear simple, functional clothing, and most of your time is spent on the repetitive, thankless tasks that are part of the daily grind. There's no opportunity for personal expression through your wardrobe or your lifestyle. Your identity is tied to your role as a wife and mother, not as an individual with dreams or ambitions of your own. You are a cog in the wheel of society, expected to play your part and do it well. And the stakes are high. Failure to do so might mean the family's reputation suffers, or worse, you risk being seen as neglecting your duties. But even beyond the domestic realm, your rights are severely restricted. If you live in Athens, you might hear the great orators debate in the assembly, speaking about justice, equality, and the rights of citizens. But you have no say in any of it. You can't vote, you can't hold office, and you certainly can't join in the discussions that shape the very laws you're expected to follow. Your voice doesn't matter, your opinions don't count. In fact, women are largely excluded from the political sphere, and the concept of a woman as a leader is almost laughable by Greek standards. The only form of power you might wield is within the private sphere of the home, and even then, your authority is dependent on your husband's willingness to delegate responsibility. In short, women in ancient Greece had no real power. And what happens if you do speak up? If you're lucky, you'll be ignored. If you're not, you'll likely be labeled as a troublemaker or worse. The public perception of women in ancient Greece is one of quiet subservience. A woman who speaks out of turn is a threat to the very fabric of society, and no one wants to see that. If you're a woman with an opinion, you'd better keep it to yourself or risk the scorn of your community. But there is a tiny glimmer of exception, of course. Sparta. Yes, good old Sparta, with its militaristic, no-nonsense approach to life, offered women a bit more freedom than their counterparts in the rest of Greece. Spartan women were educated, trained in physical fitness, and even allowed to own property. They had more say in their marriages, and were encouraged to participate in the civic life of Sparta, though, let's be clear, their participation wasn't about political rights, but about raising strong soldiers for the state. Spartan women, like their male counterparts, were expected to be warriors in their own way. They were encouraged to exercise, to stay fit, and to help maintain the state's military strength. However, before you get too excited, remember that being a Spartan woman was still far from ideal. You weren't free to live your life as you wished. Your primary duty was to ensure that your sons grew into strong warriors who could defend Sparta. If your husband died, you wouldn't be able to inherit much, and you certainly wouldn't be able to remarry without permission. Your social mobility was limited, and your choices were still constrained by the overarching demand for military strength and Spartan ideals. The freedom you had was merely a result of Sparta's obsession with eugenics and military prowess, not a true recognition of women's rights or equality. But the rest of Greece? It's a different story. Women's lives were confined to the domestic sphere, limited by societal expectations and laws that kept them in check. Your rights were restricted, your movements closely watched, and your role as a wife and mother was paramount. You were expected to serve, to endure, to maintain the household, and, above all, to be silent. Your world was small, your influence minimal, and your potential stifled by the weight of a society that saw you as little more than a vessel for children and a caretaker for your husband. As you sit in the corner of your home, spinning wool or weaving cloth, you can hear the sounds of the men outside, debating, discussing, and participating in the political process. But that's not for you. Your thoughts, your ambitions, and your desires remain locked away, confined to the small, quiet world of your household. You might long for something more, something outside of these walls, something that offers you the freedom to express yourself, to make decisions, to have a voice. But in ancient Greece, that is simply not your fate. And yet, for all the confinement, for all the repression, there's a strength in the silence of Greek women. While they may not have had the power to make laws or lead armies, they had the power to shape the hearts and minds of the next generation. The world outside might not see their value, but within the walls of their homes, they held the key to the future. They were the silent architects of society's most vital work, raising children, maintaining the household, and ensuring that the next generation of Greeks could carry on the torch of civilization. And maybe, just maybe, there's a quiet rebellion in that. Not the kind that makes headlines, not the kind that wins wars or changes laws, but the kind that lives on in the whispered voices of mothers, in the strength of the women who kept everything running while the men fought wars or philosophized. Theirs was the power of persistence, of quietly shaping the future, even when society refused to acknowledge their importance. Ah, the grandeur of Athenian democracy. You've probably heard about it in history classes, where the teacher talks about how the Athenians invented the very concept of democracy. A government by the people, for the people, they say. The birthplace of democracy, they proudly proclaim. And sure, when we look at it in a modern context, the idea of ordinary citizens having a voice in their government seems revolutionary. It's the ideal, right? The very essence of fairness, participation, and equality. But before you start dreaming about those grand democratic ideals, let me offer a reality check. Athenian democracy, while impressive for its time, had some pretty serious exclusions, and by serious, I mean massive. Let's be clear. In ancient Athens, democracy was only for a very specific group of people. And that group? Well, it was made up of adult male citizens. And before you start high-fiving yourself because, as a man, you'd be eligible, let's break down who wasn't involved in this supposed democracy. You see, the word democracy in ancient Athens was far more about privilege and exclusion than it was about equality. There were so many groups left out of the process that it makes you wonder if they were even using the same word to describe their government. First, let's start with women, those who, despite their critical role in running the home, raising the next generation, and, if you were lucky, keeping the whole social structure from crumbling under the weight of its own expectations, had absolutely no political voice. Zip, zilch, nada. Women, as we discussed earlier, were not allowed to vote, hold office, or even participate in the public life of Athens. Their job? To manage the household and, of course, raise strong warriors and philosophers, except that they weren't allowed to voice their opinions on either matter. Sounds like a pretty great deal, doesn't it? Then, let's talk about slaves. Yes, slaves. In a society that considered itself the pinnacle of Western civilization, slavery was entirely normalized. In fact, slaves made up a large portion of the population, and they were expected to do everything from cleaning the homes to working in the silver mines to serving their masters in public spaces. And guess what? No votes for them, no participation in political life. They had about as much say in Athenian democracy as a goat wandering through the agora. They might be part of society, but their rights were limited to performing labor and obeying commands, nothing more. The idea that slaves might have a voice in democracy? Well, that was a laughable notion. Now, let's not forget the medics, the foreigners living in Athens. You might think that anyone in Athens would be included in the great democratic experiment. After all, if you're living in the city, shouldn't you have a say in how it's run? Well, not in Athens. Medics, free foreigners who came to the city to trade, work, or seek refuge, couldn't vote or hold public office either. They were essential to the economy, yes, but their place in the democratic process was non-existent. You might work side by side with them in the marketplace, but when it came to the ecclesia, the central legislative assembly, you'd find the doors firmly closed to them. Just imagine working day in and day out in the city, and knowing that no matter how much you contribute, you're excluded from the very decisions that shape your life. All of these groups, women, slaves, and foreigners, were systematically shut out of the democratic process. They might live, work, and contribute to the success of Athens, but they had no voice. They were essentially political nonentities in a society that prided itself on being the cradle of democracy. And the irony of it all? The very people who were excluded from participating in this democracy were often the ones who made life in Athens possible. Without women running the households, without slaves fueling the economy, and without foreigners contributing to trade and culture, the grand experiments of Athenian democracy would have likely collapsed under its own weight. But no, only a select few got to sit in the ecclesia, debate law, and decide who would govern the city. So, who exactly could participate in this democracy? The exclusive club that had full rights was made up of free male citizens, those who were born in Athens to Athenian parents. If you were a male over the age of 18 and had completed your mandatory military service, you were eligible to take part in Athenian democracy. You could go to the ecclesia, participate in debates, vote on important matters, and even be chosen randomly to serve in various governmental roles. Now, that random selection part, it's both amusing and terrifying. Imagine this. You could be a fisherman by trade, someone who knows nothing about law or politics, and one day you might find yourself chosen to serve as a judge in a murder trial or even to oversee military decisions. There were no professional politicians in Athens. No one made a career out of government. Instead, every eligible male citizen was expected to take their turn in the political machinery, whether they were qualified or not. If you were good at fishing, you might also be called upon to determine the fate of a city-state's war plans. And who knows, maybe you'd do great. But then again, maybe you'd accidentally sink Athens into a sea of debt while trying to organize the grain supply. No pressure. And the ecclesia, where all this action took place, was anything but a quiet gathering of well-dressed statesmen. It was loud, chaotic, and participatory. Everyone who could show up was expected to be there. Thousands of citizens would gather, sometimes in the open air, in the huge, somewhat noisy Phoenix Hill to debate important matters like war, law, and even the fate of individuals who had been ostracized. Yes, you heard that right, ostracism wasn't just for social outcasts. If you were disliked enough, you could literally be voted out of the city for 10 years. Talk about a political strategy. And this wasn't just any backroom deal. It was public, and it was publicized. You didn't just attend these sessions, you lived them, as they were a vital part of your identity as a citizen. But let's be real for a moment. This democracy, as grand as it might sound, was not the beacon of fairness that we imagine when we think of the word today. It was a system built on exclusion, on the idea that only certain groups of people deserved a say. Women were excluded from the political sphere entirely, their only role in public life often being to serve as passive observers of the debates held by their husbands and sons. Slaves, though they did much of the work that kept Athens functioning, had no stake in the decisions that affected their lives. And medics? They were simply expected to live and work in Athens while being barred from participation in the decisions that shaped the city's future. Sure, Athenian democracy was groundbreaking for the time, but it was far from the inclusive, egalitarian system we hope to achieve today. In fact, it was a bit of a joke when it came to fairness. It was democracy, but for some, not for all. But the exclusion doesn't end there. The idea of an inclusive democracy would have been completely alien to the Athenians. Citizenship, in their minds, was something to be earned through birth and service, not by virtue of participation in society. If you were born a male citizen, you could count yourself lucky. If not, well, you were simply out of luck, excluded from the debate and the decision-making. It was a class-based system, and in that class structure, only the wealthy or powerful had a real shot at shaping the future. When we look back at Athenian democracy today, we must appreciate its boldness, but also recognize its flaws. It was an experiment, yes, but one that came with serious limitations. The people who lived under it, whether male citizens or excluded groups, had very different experiences of what democracy meant. For some, it was a participatory paradise. For others, it was a distant dream they could never quite reach. And when we consider the legacy of Athenian democracy, we must remember that it didn't just serve as a model for modern governance, it also left behind a blueprint of exclusion, a reminder that even the most revolutionary ideas can be limited by the social structures of their time. So, as we sit here today, reflecting on the ideal of democracy, let's remember the original Athenians, standing in their open-air assembly, debating and voting on issues that still shape the world today. But let's also remember who wasn't there, who had no voice in their society's decisions, and who remained silent in the shadows of that perfect democracy. In the end, Athenian democracy was a remarkable achievement. But for many, it was an achievement that left them behind. And maybe that's where the true lesson lies. As we continue to peel back the layers of ancient Greek society, a more disturbing truth begins to emerge. One that's far less glamorous than the marble columns and philosophical debates we so often associate with this civilization. For all the talk of democracy, freedom, and human flourishing, there was a darker undercurrent running through every aspect of Greek life. Slavery. Yes, slavery. It was as integral to the functioning of Greek society as the gods themselves, and in many ways, it was just as invisible to the public eye. Now, before you get too excited about the idea of ancient Greek freedom, those glorious democratic ideals we've discussed in the last section, it's time to acknowledge that the very foundations of this society rested on the backs of slaves. Slavery wasn't a side note in ancient Greek life, something to be glossed over quickly in a history textbook. It was everywhere, woven so deeply into the fabric of society that it almost seemed as if the Greeks couldn't imagine life without it. From the moment you stepped foot in Athens, or any Greek city-state for that matter, you'd be surrounded by the invisible but unyielding presence of slavery. And no, I'm not just talking about the slaves who worked on the ships or served in the fields. I'm talking about the slaves who ran the household, who cooked, cleaned, fetched water, and did the things that kept society running smoothly, without so much as a thank you or a pat on the back. Let's take a walk through the house of a wealthy Athenian, shall we? It's an impressive place, no doubt. Grand marble columns, frescoes adorning the walls, maybe even a statue of a god or two in the courtyard. But what you might not notice are the dozens of slaves quietly going about their tasks in the background. There's a slave in the kitchen, stirring the pot over the fire, preparing the meal for the master of the house. Another is sweeping the floors, picking up after the children who are running wild with their games. A third is busy grinding grain in the corner, while a fourth slave is outside, bringing in water from the public fountain. These are the workers whose lives revolve around maintaining the home, whose labor allows the family to enjoy a comfortable, leisurely existence. The wealthy Greek citizens may have the luxury of debating philosophy, attending public gatherings, or strategizing in war, but none of that would be possible without the grueling labor of slaves. But here's the thing. While these slaves are working away to support their masters' lives, they themselves have no rights. Zero. None. They are property, pure and simple, owned by their masters. Their bodies are at the mercy of their master's whims, their lives controlled by the demands of the household. They don't get a say in anything, no rights to land, no rights to voice their opinions, no rights to their own bodies. In ancient Greece, a slave was seen as less than human. They weren't even considered full citizens. In fact, the whole concept of citizenship was one of the most precious commodities in ancient Greek society, and slaves, by definition, could never hold that title. To be a citizen meant to be free, to have control over your own destiny, to be able to speak in the public assembly and vote on the laws that would govern your life. Slaves didn't have that luxury. They were nothing more than tools to be used and discarded as needed. And where do these slaves come from? Well, that's another uncomfortable truth. Slaves in ancient Greece were often prisoners of war, captured in battle by the victorious Greeks. It wasn't uncommon for entire populations to be enslaved after a military conquest, stripped of their lands, homes, and lives. But not all slaves were prisoners from foreign lands. Some were even Greeks who had fallen on hard times, driven into slavery by debt. Imagine that. The very people who would one day fill the agora with passionate debates about justice and equality could, in their own lives, have been reduced to the status of slaves simply because they were unable to pay a debt. And make no mistake, once someone became a slave, there was no way out. You didn't get to go home after paying off your debt. Slavery was a life sentence. And while some might think that slavery in ancient Greece was a relatively gentle institution, what with slaves often working in the home or serving as tutors for children, let me remind you that slavery was as brutal as it was ubiquitous. Yes, there were some slaves who worked in comfortable surroundings, but for the majority, life was far from easy. Many slaves were forced to work in the silver mines, an occupation so dangerous and grueling that it was effectively a death sentence. Imagine spending your days trapped in narrow, dark shafts, inhaling toxic dust, and performing back-breaking labor for hours on end. There was no escape from the mines, no reprieve from the suffocating darkness. And the punishment for attempting to escape or rebel? Death. Slaves who worked in the mines lived short, miserable lives, and were often worked to death. Their bodies, broken and worn, were discarded like trash when they could no longer contribute to the economy. The life of a slave wasn't all that different in the household either. While you might imagine the slaves in the home enjoying a bit more comfort, the truth is that their lives were just as demanding, if not more so. They had no personal space, no time off, and little to no contact with the outside world. they lived at the mercy of their masters, with no control over their daily routines, no opportunity to form relationships outside of their role as property. They were expected to work from sunup to sundown, often with little more than a meager meal to sustain them. In fact, the lives of many slaves were so harsh that they would occasionally rebel, though those rebellions were always crushed quickly and brutally. If you even dared to defy your master or run away, the consequences could be horrific. There was no such thing as slave rights, no legal protections to prevent mistreatment. Slaves were punished at will, and if they were found guilty of disobedience, they could be whipped, beaten, or even killed without consequence. Yet, despite the brutality of their circumstances, slaves in ancient Greece were an essential part of the economic machine that kept the city-states running. It was a paradox. Society couldn't function without them, but it could hardly acknowledge them as anything other than tools to be exploited. They were everywhere, working in the homes of the wealthy, serving in the fields, toiling in the mines. They provided the labor that made the comfortable lives of the free citizens possible, but their humanity was systematically denied by the very people who relied on them. What's perhaps most striking about slavery in ancient Greece, however, is the way it was normalized. It was so deeply entrenched in the society that most people didn't think twice about it. There were no great debates about the morality of slavery, no cries for abolition or emancipation. In fact, some of Greece's greatest philosophers, such as Aristotle, went so far as to justify slavery, arguing that it was a natural institution. According to him, some people were born to rule and others to serve. It was, in his view, a cosmic order, a system in which everyone had a predetermined role, and slaves simply had the nature of servants. If that sounds disturbingly familiar, it's because, to some extent, these ideas have echoed throughout history. And what about the slaves who managed to earn their freedom? It wasn't much better. Sure, there were a few slaves who managed to buy their freedom, but those who did were often left in a state of perpetual limbo. They might have their freedom, but they couldn't enjoy the rights of full citizenship. They couldn't own property, vote, or hold office. In essence, they were free in name, but still considered second-class citizens. Their new status did little to improve their position in society. They were still looked down upon by the free citizens, who saw them as inferior. Now, imagine being one of these slaves. You wake up every day knowing that your body doesn't belong to you, your time isn't your own, and your life is dictated by someone else's whims. You have no voice, no rights, no hope for a future that could be different. And yet, you continue to work, to serve, to survive, because for you, survival is the only option. It's a cruel and ironic twist of fate that the grand, noble city of Athens, home to democracy, philosophy, and the arts, was also a city built on the backs of the oppressed. The glories of Athens, the achievements of its people, the ideals they espoused, were all made possible by the labor of those who had no freedom, no voice, and no rights. It's a bitter reminder that no society, no matter how enlightened, can claim true greatness if it is built on exploitation and inequality. In the case of Athens, the tragedy of slavery was as integral to its success as its philosophies and temples. And while the philosophers pondered the nature of justice, the poets sang of love and loss, and the politicians debated war and peace, the slaves of Athens simply worked without recognition, without reward, and without rights. So, while we marvel at the wonders of ancient Greece, the Parthenon, the Agora, the works of Plato and Aristotle, let us not forget the other side of the coin. The side that relied on forced labor, on the suffering of countless individuals who had no say in their fate. It's easy to be swept up in the glory of ancient Greece, but it's important to remember that its greatness came at a high cost. And for those who lived in the shadows of its shining monuments, the price of that greatness was paid in silence. As we continue our journey through ancient Greek life, we've already witnessed the grit and grind that made up daily existence, sweaty mornings and stuffy homes, the brutal realities of the military, and the quiet suffering of those who lived under the heavy weight of slavery. But there's one more aspect of ancient life that we haven't yet tackled in full: healthcare. Now, if you're thinking of sleek, well-equipped hospitals filled with smiling doctors and nurses, let me quickly remind you that ancient Greece wasn't quite the place for that. Healthcare in the ancient world? Well, let's just say it's not exactly what you'd call modern medicine. In fact, ancient Greek healthcare, as advanced as it may seem compared to what came before, was a chaotic mix of superstition, trial and error, and a heavy reliance on divine intervention. Forget antiseptics, surgical procedures, or even basic hygiene practices. We already covered those in some detail earlier. When the people of Athens, Sparta, or any other Greek city-state fell ill, their go-to solutions weren't popping down to the local pharmacy for some aspirin or antibiotics. No, the treatments were far more rustic, shall we say. Often, when someone felt unwell, the very first thought wasn't, "Oh no, I might have a virus." Instead, it was more along the lines of, "Did I offend a god?" Let's start with the basics. Imagine you wake up one morning with a sore throat, feeling a bit off, maybe even a fever. Now, modern, you would probably reach for some cold medicine, a glass of water, and maybe take a rest, right? Not in ancient Greece. First off, there were no hospitals to visit, no doctors you could just pop in to see. The concept of a hospital, as we know it today, didn't exist. Instead, treatment was often a matter of chance, or rather, a blend of herbal remedies, prayers to the gods, and, yes, some trial and error methods that would make today's medical professionals cringe. If you were lucky, you might find yourself under the care of a physician like Hippocrates, the famous father of medicine, or one of his followers. Hippocrates himself believed that illness was a result of natural causes, not divine retribution, and sought to apply reason to treatment. But let's be real. Even Hippocrates had little in the way of effective treatments beyond some basic herbal remedies, diet modifications, and a whole lot of rest. And even though his theories laid the groundwork for modern medicine, they didn't exactly have all the answers, especially when it came to things like infections, broken bones, or anything more complicated than a sore throat. And guess what? Those cures might not even have worked. Let's dive into what treatments actually looked like in ancient Greece. If you're feeling sick, the first thing you'd likely do is consult a healer, who might be a local expert or a traveling physician. But what could you expect from them? Well, herbal medicine was one of the primary forms of treatment. Greek physicians would prescribe various concoctions made from plants, roots, and flowers, based on their understanding of the medicinal properties of different herbs. For example, garlic, often considered a wonder remedy, might be given to treat infections, while honey, yes, good old honey, was applied as a soothing agent or to help heal wounds. And let's not forget about olive oil. It wasn't just used for cleaning, as we've already discussed. It was also part of the treatment for things like sore muscles or even skin conditions. Slather it on, rub it in, and pray for the best. But what happens when the herbs don't work? Well, in ancient Greece, the next line of defense often involved prayer. You see, illness was not always considered a natural phenomenon. Far from it. In Greek culture, sickness was frequently seen as a divine punishment, a direct consequence of angering the gods. If you happened to fall ill, it wasn't simply because of bacteria or bad luck. It was because you had somehow offended the mighty Olympians, and now you were paying the price. So, what did you do when you realized you were suffering because of divine wrath? Why, you went straight to the temple to pray for mercy, of course. In many Greek cities, temples dedicated to gods like Asclepius, the god of healing, were common. These sanctuaries served as places where the sick could go to seek divine intervention. At these temples, the treatment wasn't exactly what we'd think of as healthcare. Oh no. Instead, it was a mix of religious ritual, healing practices, and a touch of mysticism. The sick would sleep in these temples overnight, hoping to receive healing dreams or visions from the gods. And if you had the right dreams, then perhaps, just perhaps, your ailments would be cured. This was known as the practice of incubation, where you spent the night in the temple, hoping for a divine visitation. If you were lucky, the god would appear in your dreams and offer a remedy. If not, well, you were just left to deal with it. Talk about a gamble, right? But let's not forget about the gods themselves. These divine beings were not shy when it came to punishing the mortals. Their tempers could be as unpredictable as the weather, and if you angered them, whether through neglecting a sacrifice or failing to pay proper homage, they'd make sure you felt their wrath. Asclepius, the god of healing, was no exception. While he was often seen as a kind and benevolent god, his power to heal was far from a guarantee. And if you were sick, you might have to make some serious offerings to him in the hope of a cure. Picture this: a patient arriving at the temple with offerings of fruit, incense, and animals, all in the hope of securing favor from the god. It wasn't just about herbal remedies, it was about appeasing the gods to avoid further illness and misfortune. No matter how much garlic or honey you rubbed on your skin, if the gods were angry with you, you were out of luck. So, what other treatments were there? Oh, we can't forget about the rather creative methods that were used to treat the sick in ancient Greece. For example, if you were dealing with a particularly troublesome cough or chest congestion, you might be subjected to something known as bloodletting, a practice that we now recognize as both ineffective and potentially dangerous. The idea was that by removing some of your blood, you could balance the humors, as Hippocrates suggested. If you had a fever, perhaps you'd be put on a strict diet of boiled figs or prescribed an odd mixture of vinegar and herbs. Did it work? Hard to say. But it was certainly better than nothing. Or at least, that's what they thought. But not all treatments were so harsh. Some remedies were gentler, though no less unproven. Take, for instance, the practice of using hot baths and steam to cleanse the body. This was a relatively common way of dealing with ailments, and while it might have made you feel better temporarily, there's little evidence to suggest it had any lasting impact on curing serious illness. But hey, if you could afford a bath, it was probably a much better option than sitting around and waiting for divine intervention. There was also the occasional use of poultices, crushed herbs applied to wounds or injuries in the hopes of easing pain or promoting healing. While some of these treatments may have had some merit, certain herbs, like lavender or chamomile, do have calming properties. Most were based more on superstition than solid science. Ultimately, what's clear about healthcare in ancient Greece is that it was very much a trial and error situation. While there were a few advancements, like the work of Hippocrates and some herbal knowledge, the medical practices of the time were nowhere near as sophisticated as we'd expect today. Illness was often seen as something beyond the realm of the human condition, a punishment from the gods, a sign of personal failure, or a result of imbalance in the body. The idea of disease as something that could be studied, understood, and treated in a scientific way hadn't quite arrived yet. And in the meantime, people had to rely on a combination of chance, divine favor, and, hopefully, a bit of herbal wisdom to get through their ailments. So, while we marvel at the temples, the philosophies, and the art of ancient Greece, let's not forget that their view of health and their methods of treatment were anything but modern. In fact, for all their advancements in democracy, drama, and architecture, the ancient Greeks were still, in many ways, at the mercy of the gods, herbs, and their own guesswork when it came to medicine. Would you survive a day in ancient Greece if you fell ill? You'd probably be praying to Asclepius by sundown, hoping that a god would take pity on you before the fever took hold. In the end, ancient Greek healthcare wasn't about curing disease so much as managing it through whatever means were available, whether that meant an herbal remedy, a trip to the temple, or just hoping that the gods would cut you some slack. If you thought the day-to-day life in ancient Greece was all work, sweat, and minimal comforts, well, you'd be right mostly. But let's take a little detour from the mundane and venture into the vibrant world of entertainment, where even the gods might not be able to save you from your fate as a captive audience. The ancient Greeks had a lot to offer in the way of culture, but much like their views on medicine and hygiene, their entertainment had a certain peculiar quality to it. Still, if you had the privilege of being one of the lucky citizens, and not, say, a woman, slave, or foreigner, you could experience some of the most intense, mind-bending, and occasionally soul-crushing forms of entertainment that the world has ever seen. Let's start with the theater. Now, imagine this. The sun is setting. The dusty streets of Athens are winding down from a long day, and you, if you were an Athenian male citizen, are headed toward the Grand Theater of Dionysus, a monumental structure where all the best people in society gathered. It's time to take your seat in the massive amphitheater, surrounded by thousands of fellow citizens, all waiting for a night of dramatic spectacle that will, no doubt, shake you to your core. There's a buzz in the air. The chorus is assembling, and the actors, in their towering masks and exaggerated costumes, are preparing to bring to life a tale that is as tragic as it is emotionally exhausting. But first, a quick reality check. You're in the audience. And, as a citizen of Athens, you're not just there to relax and enjoy a pleasant evening of entertainment. Oh no, theater in ancient Greece wasn't just about mindless fun. In fact, it was a civic duty, a responsibility even. The theater wasn't a place for leisurely enjoyment. It was a place for engaging with the most profound ideas of society: ethics, politics, war, love, and the human condition. So, if you had any thoughts of slipping into the theater just to get away from the heat or catch up on some sleep, which, let's face it, would have been tempting given the oppressive heat, think again. You were there to witness, and witness you would. Every emotion, every word, every scene was designed to pull you into a deep, existential engagement with the world around you. The performances themselves? Long. Oh, so long. Imagine sitting in the hot sun, no air conditioning, no comfy theater seats, for hours upon hours, enduring epic tales of woe and heartache. And this wasn't the kind of light-hearted comedy you'd expect to break up the heaviness. No. The tragedies were, well, tragic. These plays were designed to rip your soul apart. The Greeks were big fans of catharsis, meaning they believed the theater should make you feel everything, so you'd spend your day weeping over the fate of kings, queens, and heroes who met untimely deaths, often at the hands of vengeful gods. These were not plays where everyone ended up happily ever after. Far from it. Expect gods who tormented mortals, kings who drove themselves mad, and entire families destroyed by a single tragic flaw. One wrong decision and boom, you're done. Life, according to the Greek dramatists, was messy. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. The ancient Greek theater also offered a little relief in the form of comedy. However, much like the tragedies, these comedies were deeply political and often aimed at mocking the most powerful figures in society. Imagine watching a giant phallic costume-wearing man argue about politics while the chorus sings and dances around in pure chaos. Or a hilarious depiction of a politician or philosopher whose ideals are skewered and turned into fodder for the audience's enjoyment. Comedy in ancient Greece wasn't about light-hearted punchlines or slapstick humor. It was an intellectual roast, a public execution of the pompous and self-important. And the best part? The audience had a say in the outcome. Boo a character's bad decisions or cheer for the righteous hero, That's the power of theater in ancient Greece. It was as much about participation as it was about spectacle. But, and here's where things get a little problematic. The privilege of attending these epic performances wasn't exactly open to everyone. Women, slaves, and foreigners need not apply. It's not like they were invited to these grand festivals of cultural enlightenment. For the women in the audience, or rather the women excluded from it, their access to these events was just another facet of their restricted existence. They were stuck at home, weaving cloth, preparing meals, and raising children. No theater tickets for them. Slaves, too, were cut out of the entertainment. They might have been laboring away in the background, carrying water, cleaning the streets, or working the fields, but they certainly weren't reclining in the theater's vast amphitheater. And foreigners, as always, had to make do with their place on the outside of Greek society. The idea of cultural enrichment was very much a luxury reserved for male, native-born citizens. The rest of the world? Sorry, you're not invited. So, if you were a male citizen of Athens, congratulations. You were about to watch a play that would, in all likelihood, leave you questioning the very meaning of life. The plays were intense, often invoking deep philosophical questions about fate, justice, and morality. Was the hero doomed to fail, or could they change their destiny? Could the gods really be trusted, or were they just fickle beings playing with the lives of mortals like pieces on a chessboard? These were the questions that the theater brought to the fore, questions that were not easily answered and might linger with you for days or weeks after the performance. After all, a tragic play was more than just a source of entertainment. It was a way to confront the very fabric of existence, to test the boundaries of human nature, and to reflect on the societal values of the time. But as intense as theater was, the philosophical conversations that took place in the streets, the agora, or even the tavern were no less a part of daily life. In fact, philosophy was as much a part of the Greek world as their infamous olive oil. It wasn't just something you studied in quiet halls or read in dusty scrolls. Philosophy in ancient Greece was alive and breathing. It was a public sport. If you were in Athens, for example, it wasn't uncommon to hear a philosopher out in the marketplace, debating fiercely with passers-by, drawing in anyone within earshot to engage in a deep discussion. And let me tell you, these weren't casual, let's chat over lunch conversations. No. These philosophers had an uncanny ability to make you think and, more often than not, to make you feel incredibly stupid for not already having all the answers. Socrates was the star of this show. You might be minding your own business, picking up some olives from the market, when suddenly, bam, there he is, popping up beside you, asking you a question. What is justice? He might ask. You'd respond confidently, maybe with some deeply moral idea you've been carrying around for years, only to be torn down, piece by piece, by Socrates, until you were left utterly confused, unsure of whether justice even existed at all. This is no exaggeration. Socrates was a master at what we now call the Socratic method, a form of cooperative, argumentative dialogue that can drive anyone to the brink of existential crisis. His goal? To make you question everything. What do you know? What do you believe? And why do you believe it? He would ask, probing your assumptions and making you re-examine your life choices, often forcing you to leave the conversation, questioning your very existence. But it wasn't just Socrates. Plato and Aristotle weren't far behind, though their approach to philosophy was slightly different. Plato, for instance, wrote dialogues about ideal societies, the nature of reality, and the pursuit of knowledge. His academy was a place of intellectual enlightenment, but his philosophy was far from practical. Plato's ideas might have made you ponder the existence of your soul, but they probably wouldn't help you with your day-to-day life. Aristotle, on the other hand, took a more scientific approach, studying everything from biology to ethics. His works, however, often took a more structured, logical form, much like the Socratic method, but with a lot more charts and reasoning. But back to that daily life and the role philosophy played in it. It wasn't confined to private sessions or intellectual circles. Philosophy was everywhere. Picture this: a group of citizens standing on a street corner, having an impromptu debate about the nature of good government, or whether it was better to live in a democracy or under a philosopher king. The great minds of ancient Greece had a way of making you think about your life, your choices, and your role in the universe, whether you wanted to or not. It was as if there was a giant, invisible pressure to engage in these conversations. And let me tell you, if you didn't have an answer, well, it was like you hadn't truly lived. And just like the theater, you couldn't escape the philosophical debates. If you were caught in the agora or passing through a public square, you might find yourself trapped in a conversation that could last for hours with no escape in sight. What started as a casual chat about politics could end up being an existential crisis that left you questioning everything you thought you knew about yourself. It was a deeply intellectual society, and the only thing that was perhaps more ingrained in their daily lives than their love for democracy was their obsession with philosophy. Whether you were trying to make sense of a tragedy at the theater, or you were forced into a philosophical debate that you never asked for, life in ancient Greece was never dull. You were expected to engage with the world around you, to think deeply, to ask questions, and yes, to suffer a bit for it. But the payoff? Well, you'd walk away from these experiences a little wiser, a little more tortured, but undoubtedly part of the conversation that shaped one of the most intellectually enduring civilizations in history. So, would you survive a day in ancient Greece? Maybe. Would you survive an evening at the theater, or a philosophical crisis sparked by Socrates in the agora? I wouldn't bet on it. But at least you'd be thinking, right? As we draw our journey through ancient Greece to a close, it's impossible not to reflect on the sheer magnitude of what this civilization endured, what they lived through, and what they created despite, or perhaps because of, the many hardships they faced. From the oppressive heat of sun-baked homes to the brutality of warfare and the unrelenting demands of daily life, survival in ancient Greece was no simple feat. But for all the roughness, the grittiness, and the struggle, it was also a society that produced some of the most extraordinary contributions to human civilization. In the midst of their trials, the Greeks laid the very foundations upon which our modern world rests. Imagine living in a time when your morning routine meant hauling water from a well, rubbing olive oil on your skin to clean it, and subsisting on the most basic of diets, a thick, stony barley bread dipped in watered-down wine. The comforts we take for granted today were foreign to the Greeks. There were no showers, no soft, comfortable beds, and certainly no air conditioning or modern medicine to turn to when illness struck. It was a world where disease could be divine retribution, and the gods were both the cause of and the solution to many of life's trials. A world where a simple scratch could become infected and claim a life where your chance at survival was determined by not just your health, but the whims of the gods and the brutality of your surroundings. The social systems were equally harsh. For many, the idea of equality was as distant as the stars. Women, slaves, and foreigners, those who could not claim citizenship, were excluded from much of the public life that the average Greek male took for granted. Women, confined to the home, rarely had a chance to step outside and participate in the vibrant intellectual and artistic culture of their time. Slaves, though integral to the economy, had no rights, no voice, and were often subjected to grueling labor or the unimaginable hardships of the silver mines. The exclusion of so many from the basic privileges of citizenship served as a stark reminder that Greek democracy was, at its core, a democracy for only a few. Yet, despite all this, the Greeks thrived. Against the harshness of their daily existence, They developed systems of governance that would shape the course of history. They gave us democracy, a political system where, for the first time, the people had a say in their government, where every citizen was expected to engage in the decision-making process, even if that meant long days in the assembly or heated debates in the agora. While the democracy they created was by no means perfect, after all, women, slaves, and foreigners were excluded. It set the stage for the democratic systems we know today. In their flawed yet revolutionary approach to government, the Greeks proved that the voice of the people, even if only for a few, had the power to shape the future. Their contributions to philosophy are no less monumental. It was in the agora, on the streets of Athens, that Socrates would question the very foundations of knowledge, ethics, and morality, forever changing the way humanity would think about life and the world. His student, Plato, would go on to imagine ideal societies, explore the concept of justice, and give us the ideas that form the backbone of Western philosophy. Aristotle would take these ideas further, laying the groundwork for science, logic, and political theory. But it wasn't just the great philosophers who left their mark. Philosophy permeated daily life in ancient Greece. Public debates were commonplace, and the Greeks were taught not to accept the world as it was, but to question it, to analyze, challenge, and engage with it in profound ways. Art and culture flourished in the most surprising of places. The Greeks gave us some of the most enduring works of literature, theater, and sculpture. In their plays, they depicted the deepest aspects of the human soul: love, betrayal, ambition, and tragedy, exploring the very essence of what it means to be human. The tragedies of Sophocles, Euripides, and Aeschylus would inspire countless generations, while the comedies of Aristophanes brought humor and satire to the stage, poking fun at society's most powerful figures. And let's not forget the sculptures, the architecture, the pottery, all of it filled with beauty, craftsmanship, and ideas that still resonate with us today. But beyond the grand achievements, the legacy of ancient Greece lies in its resilience. The Greeks didn't have it easy, far from it. But despite their harsh realities, they persisted, they adapted, and they found meaning in a world that often seemed unforgiving. They survived not because life was easy, but because they were able to find ways to make sense of it. Their culture was one of constant questioning, constant engagement, and, above all, the pursuit of wisdom. The Greeks didn't shy away from their challenges. They embraced them, and in doing so, they laid the intellectual, political, and cultural groundwork for the modern world. Now, as you lie back and think about everything we've explored in ancient Greece, the heat, the dirt, the constant struggle, it might seem almost impossible to imagine surviving even a single day in that world. The odds are certainly stacked against us. With no running water, no health care, and no modern conveniences, it's hard to see how anyone could endure such a life, let alone thrive in it. The ancient Greeks faced daily struggles that would break most of us, and yet they endured. They faced plagues, wars, and the constant threat of divine punishment, and yet they managed to build a civilization that endures to this day. If anything, their legacy shows us just how resilient the human spirit can be, even in the most trying of circumstances. Would you last a day in ancient Greece? Probably not. The heat, the physical labor, the social limitations, and the constant threat of illness would likely overwhelm us. And yet, the Greeks, through sheer will, ingenuity, and a sense of purpose, survived. They thrived even. And though their world was far from perfect, it was their ability to create meaning from the chaos, to shape their world with ideas, and to question the very nature of existence that has left an indelible mark on history. As you settle into the quiet of the night, let the thoughts of ancient Greece gently drift through your mind. Despite all their struggles, the Greeks showed us the power of resilience, the value of wisdom, and the beauty of human endeavor. In their sweat, their toil, and their questions, they shaped the world we know today. Perhaps, in the midst of our own modern comforts, we can learn something from them. Maybe it's that life doesn't have to be easy to be meaningful, and that sometimes it's the challenges we face that shape us the most. So, as you close your eyes and drift into the softness of sleep, remember that the Greeks, in their own imperfect way, gave us the foundations of everything we hold dear today: democracy, philosophy, art, and above all, the courage to face life's challenges head on. They didn't just survive, they shaped the future, and in doing so, they left us a legacy of resilience, creativity, and ideas that continue to inspire. And now, as you rest, let those thoughts wash over you like the gentle breeze of a Greek evening. Relax. For though life may be challenging, much like it was for the ancient Greeks, the spirit of their resilience and wisdom is here with us, whispering through the ages. Sleep well, for tomorrow brings another day of discovery, just as it did for those who lived in that sun-baked world so many centuries ago.